Hi everybody, we're moving on to Unit 7. Yes, we did skip Unit 6 for now. We'll come back to it if we can. Unit 7 is all about radicals. We talked about how to put them in the calculator and get a decimal, but now we need to talk about simplifying and using them in equations and all that type of stuff. So today we're going to start with Unit 7. Section 1. Simplifying numeric radical expressions. We're just going to deal with numbers today. Numerical radical expressions. There's a couple things you need to know how to do in order to do this. So before we get too deep into this, let's talk about prime factorization. Prime factorization is where you take a number and you write it in expanded form with just prime factors. You may remember doing a factor tree. And actually that's what I'm going to use here. So for example, if we had the number, let's start with 20. Okay? And I wanted that written out in prime factors. The first thing to do is try to think of two numbers that multiply to 20. It doesn't matter what two you start with. You're going to get the prime factors no matter what. So let's say I think of 2 and 10 right away. I do know that 2 is a prime number. Remember, a prime number is divisible by itself and 1 and nothing else. And so I always circle my prime numbers because you'll notice as we get to larger numbers, you could easily lose them. And then 10 is going to be 2, which is a prime, and 5, which is prime. So 20 written out in prime factored form is 2 times 2 times 5. So that should look somewhat familiar. Let's do just one more. Just as a way, let's say we have a pretty big number and we're trying to figure it out. So let's say we have 126. Okay, let's say I don't know what two numbers multiplied together equals 126, but I do know that 126 is even. So I check to see, let's divide it by 2. Well, 126 divided by 2 is 63. If you're not sure if 63 is prime, then test it and start dividing it through, or look at a multiplication table. It's actually not prime. It can be divisible by 3 actually. So we have 3 and 21. All I did was get a calculator and go 63 divided by 2, that didn't work. 63 divided by 3, that did work. And so I wrote that down. I'm circling 3 because it's a prime number. And then 21 can be split into 7, which is prime, and 3, which is prime. So now 126 can be written as 2 times 3 times 7 times 3. Now if you really wanted to be fancy, you could do 2 times 3 squared times 7. We don't have to do that. I just thought I would show it to you. Okay, so that's prime factorization. So let's get into, I'm just going to show you some examples here and what I'm talking about. Now I have a really weird story that goes with this, and I'm going to teach it the way I always teach it in class, and that's by talking about a real story, my weird story. Now if Miss Sally was here, she would be adding in all kinds of strangeness. And if you come to our Google Meets, I'm sure she'll add a lot more to the story. You just have to ask her. So I always talk about a radical being a number jail. And the number doesn't want to be under the radical if it can help it. It wants to be free of the radical. Well, there's only one way to escape the radical jail, and that is you have to have a twin. If you have a twin, you can escape. So let's prime factor 12. So I'm going to do the prime factoring over here. And I'm going to prime factor 12. Now some of you might not need to do this step that I'm doing with the prime factors, but I'm just showing you what I'm thinking. So 2 times 6, well, there's my 2, that's prime. And then 6 is 2 and 3, there's my 2 prime numbers. Okay, so you might be able to do that in your head, or you might need to write it down, it doesn't matter. So what we have here is the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 3. Now, in order for them to escape, they have to find themselves a partner that looks exactly like them. So 2 and 2 are pairs. So this is where Miss Sally adds all kinds of interest to it. So if you are listening to this and you want to hear Miss Sally's interest, come on over to Google Meets and I'm sure she'll explain it to you. So what happens is these two numbers try to escape. They successfully escape, but something happens and Miss Sally's story comes into play, and only one of them actually ever make it out. Something happens to the other one. 3 didn't have a partner, so he's the sad guy left behind in the number prison. So our final answer is going to be 2 root 3. Okay? So we take out our pairs, and that goes on the outside, and the square root of 3, because 3 is left behind. All right, let's try another one. Let's try the square root of 90. Again, you may be able to prime factor 90 in your head, but let's say you can't think of it. There's a couple places to start, but as soon as I see a 0 on the end, I think 10. So 9 and 10, neither of which are primes. And 9 is 3 times 3, so that works. There's my 2 primes there, and 2 times 5. Okay, so I'm going to split 90 up into 3 times 3 times 2 times 5. And I'm going to look for some pairs, okay, to see who can escape the number prison. And who can escape? The 3s. Again, something horrible happens. You'll have to ask Miss Sally. She'll tell you the rest of the story. The 3s make it out. The 2 doesn't have a partner, and neither does the 5, so they sadly don't make it out. Now, you need to multiply what's left inside, so what I have left is 3 root 10. And that's going to be my simplified answer to root 90. That's simplified radical form. Let me draw some lines here so you know where one starts and one begins. Okay, let's try another one. And maybe you want to pause it and try it on your own and see if you can get the right answer. C is the square root of 20. Again, if you need to, come off to the side and prime factor it. 4 times 5 is what came to my head first. 5 is prime. And then I factored 4, which is 2 times 2. 2's are prime. So now I have my prime factorization. 2 times 2 times 5. I look for my twins. They escape. Something happens. And only one of them makes it out. The 5, however, is the left behind one. And so we have 2 root 5. Did you get that one? Okay, now this next one is really hard because there's lots of 2's involved. It's not really hard. There's a lot of 2's involved, so you got to be careful. So the square root of 32. Now when you prime factor 32, you're going to get 2 and 16. That's great. And then you're going to get 2 times 8. Okay, 2. Then you're going to get 2 times 4. And then you're going to get 2 times 2. So I'm going to be careful here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 2's. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 2 to the 5th is 32. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Okay? Let's see who can escape. Now sometimes more than one set can escape. That's what's going to happen here. This set of 2's can escape. And when they escape, one of them, something horrible happens. Talk to Miss Sally. And a 2 gets out. But we still have another set of 2's left in there. So we can factor out another set of 2's. And those 2 escape again. And again, something horrible happens, and only one of them makes it out. Now we multiply the 2 on the outside. Okay? And then who's left behind? There is one sad 2 left behind. He didn't have a partner, so he's left behind. So we have 4 root 2 as our final answer. Okay? Let's do one where there's a visitor. This will be our last one. So E. There's a visitor outside this prison. 2 is visiting the square root of 45. Square root of 45 wants to make a jailbreak, so let's prime factor 45. Okay, I think of 9 and 5. You may have thought of something else, but 9 and 5 what comes to my mind. So I know there's a 5. And then the 9, which is 3 times 3. Now this 2 is outside the prison, so it doesn't interact with the prisoners at all until there's an escape. So then we have 3 times 3 times 5. Do we have a set of prisoners to escape? Yes, we do. We have a 3 and a 3. Now that 2 is waiting on the outside, and whoever escapes multiplies by the 2 on the outside. So the 3 escapes. Remember, something horrible happens on the way out. You'll have to ask Miss Sally. And 5 gets left behind. So our final answer for this one is 6 root 5. So I know it's a silly story, but sometimes I like to relate things back to something that'll kind of stick in your head. There's my silly story for square rooting. Try the homework. put the answer key on, and then stop by your teacher's Google Meets and see if you have any questions.